Thanks, Doug. So as I said before, today we start a 3-week exploration of our vision, mission, and values here at the Garden. We have a plan for this. Our first goal is that at the end of this, we're all able to state them in memory, our vision, mission, and our values, as well as we each will have an opportunity to explore, well, what is it that I believe in? And how is it that I fit into this bigger mission and vision? And what is my own mission and vision for life? The prophet Jeremiah knew something about vision, and that's what prophets did. They used to be visionaries for the people, for all people, just not individuals. And in the 29th chapter of Jeremiah, he gets a word from the Lord for a group of people who have been exiled for many, many, many years. And it said, he said to them, God said to him, "For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare and not to harm, to give you a future of hope." That was God's word for these folks. At the Garden, some 20 plus years ago, there was a team that put together a mission and vision statement for us as well. And here are our vision and mission statements. Our vision statement is that people experience God wherever they are, just a recognition that we experience God wherever we are. And our mission is to engage all in the quest to know the unconditional love of God. So since I want you to memorize it, let's just go ahead and give that a try right now. Are you ready? Our vision is that people experience God wherever they are. Our mission is to engage all in the quest to know and share the unconditional love of God. That was outstanding. So today we embark on Vision Next. Vision Next. Again, you can be part of this process if you're interested in exploring where it is that God is calling us next. For those of us with sight, we tend to have vision start with this sense. And this sense, if I say big red ball, you see, you created a big red ball. You did, didn't you, right? Turn it black, whatever. That's vision for a lot of us. That's what we do, is we create around our sense of seeing. But Helen Keller once said, the most pathetic person in the world is someone who has sight but has no vision. I have to say, I agree with Helen. It is said that we are limited by our abilities or our own circumstances only because we have limited vision of what can be. A vision is not just a picture of what can be, it's an appeal to our better selves, a call to become something more. We are all called to be visionaries in life, not only for our own lives, but for the world as well, to see the powerful possibilities that there are in a future, that there can be in a future. Together we can recognize that God has a vision and an idea for each and every one of us, not just to live an ordinary life, but to live an extraordinary life. There's this famous story about this block of marble that sat around for about 40 years. Most sculptors thought it was flawed. But then in 1501, a 26-year-old sculptor saw it, looked around it, and thought, no, there's something special in there. See, he saw a man inside that block. And if you recall, that sculptor was Michelangelo, and actually the image is of David, which we all know pretty well. It is said that Michelangelo said David was inside there. All he had to do was chip away to create this amazing sculpture and release him. Well, I believe that we're all created with this kind of purpose and meaning. We have big blocks of marble sitting right out there in front of us, and it's going to be our job to try to figure out what's inside of the future for each and every one of us. The Garden is the product of one of these visions. Over 20 years ago, Reverend Dr. Linda McCoy had such a vision. And she began to chip away, or plant, as one would say, with no land at all, this thing called the Garden. And that's why we're here today. I have asked the Reverend Dr. Linda McCoy to join us here today to share in some conversation. So friends, will you join me in welcoming Linda back to the Garden?
You forgot what Suzanne Stark always called me.
What
The
was
very most high
the very most high?
Reverend Doctor. Just make sure we don't forget that.
Okay. The very most high, Reverend Dr. Linda McCoy.
Thank you for including me here today.
Linda, we're glad to have you here today as we talk about vision. Tell us about that original vision some 20 years ago.
Well, a lot of the folks here have heard the story about the dream on the plane that's been explained in so many ways. And I guess to kind of summarize it, as many of you know, it was that at least I was to be involved in doing something far different from anything I'd ever done before in terms of ministry. And we started out basically with the folks, we put out a call to the St. Luke's folks and said, would anybody like to be a part of something new? We don't know what it's going to be for sure, except it's not going to be something that already exists. It's going to be something different from that. And some folks, including Norm and Sue, came forward to help us do that. And we started with a blank slate. I mean, it was really, we kind of wiped everything clean and said, okay, what are the bare essentials that we have to have? And what do we not need to have? And then what would be the kind of ministry, the kind of church we want to be a part of? Something that's maybe never been before, and maybe will never be again, who knows? And so people together began to kind of shape that. We visited, Norm mentioned Willow Creek. He forgot to mention the fact that he had a wreck coming back from Willow Creek, but we went to Willow Creek, which is a big, huge magnet church in Chicago. And we went to some other places, and basically what we did was process and say, what do we like, what do we not like? Where are the ideas we can use, where are the things that we can't use? And in the process of that, as this dream started to turn into something, we put together, well, Mike's a business person, as many of you know, my husband, and so he said, you got to have a business plan. So we wrote a ministry plan, and it included things like you would expect, goals and objectives, and then we began to think of what kind of thing were we going to provide for people? Who were we going to try to reach as a part of this ministry? How was it going to be organized? How was it going to happen? How was it going to be financed? How were we going to pay for this? And then what was our timeline? And we set the last possible date for launching whatever this was going to be as the 10th of September 1995, and that's when we actually launched at that point. So it was an interesting process. I sort of had the vision of something new and different, but it didn't have flesh on it. And it was the folks who came together who basically closed their eyes and began imagining what something different would be and actually seeing something different. That's why we do some of the things we do. Use secular music because we were in a secular place, in a business place. This theater had been offered and donated to us. And so, how do we blend this? How do we blur the lines? And it kind of evolved from there. It's a compilation of the vision that a lot of people had that kind of came together. So,
how did you get people like these folks out here engaged in that vision?
Lots of talking.
Yeah.
Lots of talking. I started out, of course, trying to engage the leadership of St. Luke's, which is the founding church for the garden, and let people know what this idea was and engage their support, whether they were going to be involved or not. And then we had a group of probably 60 or 75 who really said, okay, we'll give you 1 year. We'll give a year to help get this launched because we didn't want to open the doors and have nobody show up. And so we thought that if we had these folks who could invite other folks, then we would be able to have at least a little core. And they were the worker bees, really. I mean, they did everything. They greeted people at the door. They did the hospitality things. They just did everything that we needed to do until we could get people who became gardeners to step in to take over those roles. So I think, I guess they would have to say why they decided to be a part of this. But I kind of hope it's because they saw the possibility of creating something and having a hand in that, and the sense of satisfaction that came. It was really, it was just so corporate. It was so collegial that everybody contributed something. And I suspect, like Jolene House was one of those folks who started early on, was up in the booth, and I suspect she can see her mark on this because Jolene's the one who suggested videos, using videos here, and knew every movie that ever existed and every scene out of every movie. So it was just pretty phenomenal how that evolved with people's gifts and talents and sharing them.
So some of the greatest joys and challenges in that visioning process in the last 20 years.
One of the greatest joys that I ran this past Mike before. I run a lot of things past Mike before I do things, and I ran this past him and said, greatest joys is that people came back. That was the surprise. We didn't know if anybody would come that first Sunday, and then the subsequent Sundays, and then once they came, we didn't know if they'd ever come again. And so it's that's been a joy to see that. One of the things that has always pleased me about the garden is its inclusivity, how people are welcomed and invited here, and how diverse the garden is. That wasn't an intentional thing. We said all, and we meant all, but all kinds of people came, and there's such richness in the diversity. And then the other joy, I guess, we had when we started a full children's program planned here, sort of like a Sunday school, because that was my background. We didn't call it that, but they were garden sprouts or something like that. But what we discovered is that families like to be together here. And we would have families say it was the only time in a week they sat around a table together and shared, and they could share the same conversation when they left. And the surprising thing was kids got it too, whatever our message was. They were able to get it from a song or from a video or something. So that was a real joy, I think, that came, and a surprise that came from there.
Challenges?
What challenge that we still have really is how to help people connect with one another, because we're in a borrowed space, a donated space, and we have to be, obviously, and we want to be respectful for the theater and its ownership and its staff. And so especially early on, we were in and out, and it felt a lot like Disney. You came in the front door, you went out the side door, and there was this revolving door. And it was really hard to help people get connected, and that still is a challenge, I think. There have been some inroads made in that, but it's still a bit of a challenge there. That's one. And, of course, financial. The financial challenge is always a big one, I think, and how are we going to make ends meet, and how are we going to do the ministry we want to do. But I think probably every ministry that is worth its salt always has those challenges. So,
well, that's good to know. Do you have any tips for us as we move forth with this Vision Next or Vision 2020?
I guess a couple things. One is be willing to try anything at least once, and sometimes maybe only once. There were a lot of things we tried. Here we are in the theater and thought, okay, we'll do drama. Well, we did it once and we never did it again because we couldn't do it very well. And, to do what you do as well as you can do it, I suppose that's a piece of it. And the garden's at a place now. When we started, there was nothing. I mean, it was like a blank slate. We could start from scratch. You're not starting from scratch. Here, there is this established organization at this point, more or less established and more or less organized, but there is this entity that we call the garden, and that's different. And the garden is at the point where it's going to become its own church. And so that creates its own set of challenges, I think. It's a new thing, but I think it's a matter of keeping people informed, inviting people who want to be involved, trying each of us to figure out what role can we play, how can I help, what can I do, and I think just inspiring, and you'll do that with your energy and enthusiasm, inspiring people to step up and help out.
So these folks here.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So how do we go about, we continue to get them engaged in this process?
Well, I think partly of what you're doing now is just to keep in front of people and keep talking to people, both individually and collectively. And I think it's also to realize that not everybody will be a part of it. What we discovered is of the probably 60 to 75 who came early, we probably filtered down to about 50 because some folks decided, that's not my gig. That's not what I want to do. So people self-select and choose a different direction. And that's okay, I think, to allow the freedom to do that. But just to be thinking for yourself, I mean, it's just like all the whole message and the videos that you've seen, what part can each of us play? And where's my little piece that I can contribute and help? So I think it's just keeping it in front of people and keep inviting, and see who shows up. And don't eliminate anybody in your mind. There are always some surprises, I think. Some people show up that you don't expect, and you wonder what they can contribute, and they turn out to be absolutely phenomenal and very valuable. So it's a good gift.
So you once wrote something that I'm going to quote here right now. You wrote, "Doing a new thing requires us to step out of the box and consider new ways of being. The message of the good news of God's unconditional love for us never changes. The way in which we communicate the message is what changes." You also said, "I believe God is calling us to our own unique ministry. It is being willing to listen to God's voice and respond, stepping out in faith and confidence that we are living true to God's call."
Did I say that?
Yeah. You wrote it in a book called Planting a Garden.
That was pretty good.
It's a great book. I really recommend it if you take over a place called The Garden. Does that all still hold true today? Do you think that's some of those lasting words?
Well, I hope it does. And I think it sounds like a cliche, and those of you who've been around for a while know I don't use this very much, but it's a let go and let God. If there's anything I learned at the beginning of the garden, was all about faith and trust. I had spent a lot of my ministry prior to that time being the organizational person and the kind of controlling person. And when this vision came out of the blue, and when people started to be involved with it, it was a God thing. I knew it was a God thing. And I had to get out of the way and not try to direct it one way or the other and let it be. And I learned a lot about faith, but that let go and let God has stayed with me a lot. And it's, I guess that's where the garden has been all along, and I trust that's where the garden will continue to be. That whatever comes will be where God wants us to go, if we just are willing to follow, to listen, to hear, to try to be in tune with it, and then to be willing to step forward that way.
That's great.
You wanted me to use this quote.
That's all right. Do you know that Martin Luther King once talked about faith?
Yeah, I know he did. You know what he said?
What did he
said,
say?
faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. And that's exactly where we are. It's a matter of taking that first step. And I'll be praying for the garden and for its future as it moves forward.
Because we are quite a way up the 20 years up the staircase.
Yeah, but there's a landing there, so you got to go up the next the next flight of stairs.
Kind of like Beethoven boards.
Yeah, right.
You know, it is fitting that today we are talking about vision. It was kind of planned this way. And today would have been, or tomorrow would have been Martin Luther King's 87th birthday. And even though he's been gone since 1968, his faithful dream lives on. Go ahead and take a look.